that Ericsson is a leader in mobile phone, and now it is the leader in network. What is the standard Ericsson is going to play or fixing in the standards regarding the network security? Because it is going to grab the whole world. 3 questions to the audience.
So, as far as literacy is concerned, there is a very big now push from the Honorable Prime Minister of having the 22 Indian languages on the mobile phone. So it's in the last mile now. In the next 6 months or so, obviously on a smartphone it's not very difficult because you don't have a keypad. It's not very difficult to have these things. So what we are going to have is there are going to be 3 compulsory languages on the phone, which is English, Hindi, and 1 local language. That is to make calls and text and data. But to receive, all the languages will be enabled to receive. And on the feature phone, the similar thing is going to happen. So this is almost in its last legs at the moment. So the messages which were coming across India, which were in Unicode, unfortunately, because people were not able to get local languages, all that within the next 1 or 2 years will be overcome. Does that answer? Yeah. Yes.
Ma'am, we would like to restrict it to SEP because we are already having shortage of time. So your questions are to some extent, I feel, out of the subject, but you want to ask her? So because we are shortage of time, maybe I will ask Mr. Saha to address your.
No, I don't know. As far as I understood, the question was in the insecure network. You are questioning the mobile phones as such. There's no deal with SEP directly what we are discussing today, but certainly it involves many other issues other than SEPs. If we are not able to provide secure network, who is responsible? So one has to really see it could be many agencies involved, including the suppliers of technologies.
I must admit I'm not fully prepared to answer this question on the context, but I'm for sure also thinking that security is a big aspect which we are discussing in our company, and which standard we're going to go for it, I don't know. I mean, that has to be seen. There is, of course, a lot of discussions ongoing, but I'll keep it to what I said this morning. The best one should succeed.
Yeah, your proposal, Professor Heinz, was very interesting. And which brings me to the question that I always have about FRAND. Somehow we always get fixated, besides all the technical issues, on the base of the FRAND being related to the total price. And that was what the focus, the main objection from Mr. Mahindru and Mr. Chaudhary. Now, in the world of globalization, technological change and values, in economics we have moved away. For example, you don't analyze, nobody sensible person analyzes trade on the basis either of exports or imports or net. What you do is on the basis of value added. Similarly, in taxation, you go and value added. So a formulaic approach like that, which is what I think you're driving at, should be possible. So the question of whether it is single digit or whatever should be not just the single digit, but what should be the basis. And that basis should be, and you have various methods, very rigorous methods like Shapley value or whatever to have cost allocation, fair cost allocation. Why? I have not seen any literature on FRAND which, for example, talks about using Shapley value type of methodology like that.
May I just briefly comment on this?
Yeah, could I just, since I'll sit down, that is the core of the question. But one other point to Mr. Saha, who seemed to draw a dichotomy, since I'll sit down after this. You talked about technology versus public interest. My point is it should be only public interest. Technology is a part of public interest. Access is another part. So I think that's a false dichotomy. You can't just say this This may not be in the public interest, but this is promoting growth. If growth is not in the public interest, we shouldn't promote growth.
Just, I think I need one sentence. The guidelines for calculate using license analogy according to employees' invention law in Germany comprise long-standing provisions what to do as to determine the reference basis for royalty calculation, what to do if there are multiple patents under the view of the maximum load. This is why I believe, fully in conformity with you, that friend for one patent is nonsense. There must be a friend for the whole complex. What do I have to pay? I had once in 2003 to pay, also they requested us for buyer in a for hire in China for certain mobile phone things, 53% for GSM license. This was unsellable than the product, practically. So I think it is all there in the law in Germany. It is used since many decades. We have done this discussion with the United States now, start to do, namely as to smallest sellable unit, all these things, this has been decided in Germany since 30, 40 years. There's long-standing case law by the Federal Court of Justice. Keyword, Bauernfeind 1, 2, 3, it has to do with a tornado fighter, with a little air control in one of the engine. Is the fighter the basis for royalty calculation? Is it the engine? Is it only the chip for $1 or whatever? So there is long tradition. This has been decided. And this is why I'm proposing in the patent offices. They have this tradition. They use this case law all the time. And they could do it if one would extend the whole thing into the friend discussion by using the license of right declaration.
I didn't. Can you elaborate a little more? You see, let me tell you a few things. Let's talk about the size of the markets, right? $500 billion is the size of the market, global size of the market. We are $16 billion today. China is about $110 billion. Out of $110 billion, how much of standard essential patent royalty is flowing out of China? First question. Okay. We will be $100 billion by 2023 or 2022 as a mobile phone market. Now, in $100 billion, what is the package outflow of SAP royalties which awards the inventiveness and the innovativeness of all the SAP holders? That's the debate. So is it $500 million? Because then we'll breach the principle what Gabriel was talking about, that is single digit, because it's 0.5%. Or is it relevant at all that you have to peg it to $100 billion, or it is pegged to the $5 billion out of that, which is the communication protocol? Please try to explain, yes. Exactly. That's the next thing I was coming to.
The method is to focus on the base. If all the debate in India is always on whether on the percentage. I'm saying the rational, economic, sensible, right incentive, balancing public and private interests, balancing different stakeholder interests, requires you to measure the base.
See the structures of the industries. What has happened is that in traditional structures of industries, you load your cost of your royalty onto your component or to your product when you are selling it to someone else, right? When you are not merely, but when there is a sort of consortium or there is this market chaos, then you try to drive other ways of extracting royalty. This is the, what the users are talking about. So coming back to that $100 billion, now you see this $100 billion would include $30 billion of display, $5 billion of battery, lithium-ion battery, some maybe the whole chipset stack together, put together, would be about $10 billion. So what Anupam is saying is that should it be 2% of $10 billion or should it be 0.5% of $100 billion? I don't know. The first one looks more sensible and logical, but probably there is some logic in the second one also. But there is no logic in a single digit, which could also be 9, because at 9 everybody will be dead. Because the other market, which is which is 100 now, which will be 400 later, that market will probably be paying maybe $1 billion as the total this thing. We also have to evaluate what is the macro R&D which is going into, and what is the cost of that R&D globally, and how many times do we have to reward it, and for how many years do we have to reward it. If all the R&D engineers, all the inventors in the world, we are spending $500 million per year dollars. So what is the right return to those guys? Is it $1 billion? Is it 2? Is it 5? Is it 10? Or is it 200 million? This is a question. So all this will come up for serious debate with the Patent Office, with the Competition Commission, and with the ministries. Obviously these things will be settled, because if we want to have equitable growth, if we have to have a level playing field, everybody has to get involved, and we have to settle this.
Can I join the number playing game? I'd like to also give one example. I mean, Indian phones, or phones sold in India, are mostly imported from China. So it's the price going to the Chinese is $50, I just say. The ASP, average sales price of phones, I talk about the more high-end ones, is $250. Average sales price. They are one for 100, they're one for 500. That's the figure we have. So import 50, 250. And we heard this morning in the talk, oh, it's ruining us if we have to pay $15 per line. 50, 250, 250 minus 50 is 200, and then $15 ruin? Okay, thank you.
Yep. But this is probably an ingenious perspective. See, I see, the microprocessor, the explosive growth and Moore's law, the number of transistors doubling, every year, and the price halving. We have not seen that kind of a, technology, intense research on the protocol stack of the GSM, chipset. If that kind of research were to be done, probably, we would be, I don't know, teleportation would have been definitely possible. If those, percentages would have applied. Just apply Moore's law to the GSM stack, and speeds that are possible in 5G, today, would have been, made available probably in the year 2000. That would have been the impact. And definitely, when the inventor says that, yes, this is the kind of value that I am bringing to the table, definitely they are entitled to a percentage of that growth as well.
And one very important thing is, when we do substandard standardization, you see, merely because we want to move up a standard. For example, R99 was a lousy standard. The first 3G standard was not, really a standard which set it apart from edge. So this is also something one has to consider when this is being considered.
I just want to make one comment, drawing from what Mr. Mahendru said. How can we ever get access to what an industry spent on their R&D? That's their trade secret. It's very good to sit in a hall like this and say, well, we should get this data, but where is the data? Because Government of India has been working on this in the area of drug. When we are talking about compulsory licensing, this licensing, that licensing, but there's no way. So I think one has to really find a mid path. And you see, the good example I'll give you, again taking from the drugs, Indian Patent Act at once upon a time talked about compulsory licensing at 4% royalty. But we know that licensing practices in other places in the world, around 5 to 7, 6% of net sales, it can go higher or lower. And finally, in the Netco case, IPAB went for 6% royalty rate. So we have to learn from market practices also. Every time we cannot say that this is what we are going to do. Yes, you can do it provided you have the data and provided you have the energy to work out all the details, otherwise you will not succeed. So I think what I'm trying to say is we have to have some kind of a practical approach to the whole problem when we come to deciding on royalty rates. I'm not saying which one is correct or which one I opt for, no. One has to go for discussion and decide what royalty rates are suitable for us.
You want to know?
Yeah, I just had one question, and I have more curiosity about it, is why can't we have a single harmonized rate across the world because I don't think what you are trying to calculate can actually be calculated, and what you're trying to negotiate a royalty rate can be negotiated considering the factors we have. So wouldn't it be a good idea across the world to have an harmonized structure of royalties? I mean, it's just my observation.
But
I don't know what is
when
the
we say non-discriminatory, that I think when we say these three words we use, we are actually telling that like
that is,
be
that is
like
fine,
this.
but it is
But
not
to
actually the
determine
case.
and then the issue coming means that even
what
if
is the issue?
idealistic terms we use to follow that is very difficult to
then
work out on it.
Then what is the issue?
So the issue is that there are two parties, one standing on that side, the other on the other side of it. No, I'm not saying that. Like, no, there is a person who is using and he wants it to be reasonable. There is a person who says, I have put so much of effort and spent so much in innovation, I should recover that. And now the recovery is to the extent there is a statement that there is a 80% failure in innovation and 20% success. So that means with the 20% success, you are trying to recover 80% failure also. So if that is the trend, like, no, compassion cannot be ground. I cannot say India population is so much and I should proliferate technology, so be considerate and compassionate to me. So that cannot be the logic. There has to be some fair, reasonable transparency and non-discriminatory terms. That could be the only logic, what I feel.
You see, just to answer that, the distrust has come about because of this very reason, because we found a opaqueness in the operation where, you know, when injunctive relief was sought, certain royalty rates were mentioned in a constitutional court. And then, you know, by accident, a very small importer was given virtually half that rate. And then the, you know, patent holder or the licensor says that, you know, this was by mistake. Now that whole thing has put everything in a spin. So there is a deep distrust between both the parties that, you know, who is speaking. It's not that people are not willing licensees or not talking, right? People are talking, but there is a very, very deep distrust, and there is opaqueness in presentation of what have the rates been, because the practices have not been consistent.
Last question, and we will close this. You also want to ask only
I have one question.
three questions?
No, one question.
One question, but he's trying to ask before you. So please.
Okay, I'm a strong believer of SCPs, so I support Gabriel and Dr. Hens in this. Okay, before I ask my question, I take three examples. So one is Microsoft versus Motorola in Seattle. So when, you know, the royalty rate was fixed at 0.019%, and then the next one is IEEE policy, where they have, you know, set the low bar for royalty for, you know, charging SCPs patents. And the third question is Apple versus Ericsson, which is a recent case in US again. So Apple is again undermining the, you know, the fee which they have to pay as a royalty to the Ericsson. And Apple also cited Alay's case to invalidate the protocols, SCP protocols. I know it's a latest one, last month itself. So now my question, and also I would like to hear from Ericsson, that you as a SCP you know, portfolio holder, how would you see all this, you know, whereas entire old is undermining the value of SCPs?
I mean, when you're not good, you're not challenged, and this is what I see. But I can just say, I mean, we have more than 100 agreements signed with licensees. We have repeated licenses over the year, and these case you mentioned, I mean, there are always exceptions to things, and it's a last resort. But of course, they always pop up, and I mean, we also heard before, it's much more litigation in the cases. If you count the single cases, it looks like this, maybe yes. But I don't think that it is so challenging. But every now and then, because of FRAND conditions, we have to file a litigation. We have to go, because if somebody has a hold-up, doesn't pay, we are forced to do, because then the others will say, I stop paying as well. I stop not accepting your rights. So all in all, I think it's, we live with it. We would prefer not to be forced to have litigations. I'm not Swedish, but Swedes are very, very unlitigious. They're very smooth in doing this. And it's really a last resort. But if we need to, just because of FRAND, we also need to go for it. And then we request also injunctions, because the law allows it to us. And at the end of the day, nobody starts a litigation to have an injunction rendered at the end. The idea is to get people back to the table and reasonably talk. More than 100 agreements show that it works.
Yeah, I would like only to suggest, to also add, I'm also not saying that you don't need litigation anymore. The litigation is, in my proposal, only shifted to a more competent authority, the patent offices and the appeal instances on top of them. Only that there is no injunction threat, because injunction threat, I know we all know this from our own experiences. What is it? It is a blackmailing opportunity. It is an instrument used in many instances just to exert so much pressure on somebody that he cannot do anything else anymore than agreeing to something which otherwise he would not agree to. Now, one can say we live in a litigious society, we wish such a world. I come from a country where we normally don't wish this. We are not, like in the United States, for example, trying to squeeze the maximum out of people. And I'm not saying that Ericsson does this, nobody does. I would say there must be the possibility of a court decision on fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory. It must be. I only say the normal courts are not able to do it.
I would say a litigation without a possibility of injunction is a toothless tiger. I mean, then the hold-up just comes later. I mean, there has to be some threat. You could say it's the money, but there are companies around, and I don't say they're here in India or somewhere, that have the financial. You have a financial advantage of not paying. And if there's no injunctive relief possible, it's a toothless tiger. I don't want to say that it has to be enforced all the time, but it's a toothless tiger. Then we can go on and we pay the attorneys, and we wait for court decision, then we appeal. That can take up to 10 years.
But wait, then you say in principle that the whole US litigation system is a toothless tiger, because they have eBay considerations in all questions of injunction. Always you must ask, is the injunction balancing the interests of patentee and defendant correct? Is public interest sufficiently? And we don't have this under these automatic injunction countries like Germany, for example. And this is why we need a different remedy, or we must put everything under eBay consideration.
Their tooth is the high damage fees they have, but maybe that's also another question.
One small thought. If the cycle of, somebody stops payment, that disrupts the cycle of innovation as well. We don't want innovation to suffer as such. We want the inventors to continue to invent.
Tea break.
Last question, please, because we have to close the session.
Dr. Pankaj Sai here. I'm talking much